The last unit of this module is about computer-supported collaborative learning. A nice topic to end this module and also this course. First, we will dive into some theoretical considerations. Then we will discuss the knowledge building communities or the Knowledge Forum project. We will discuss findings related to collaborative writing, and then we will eventually discuss a more theoretical issue, confronting cognitions in dialogues, the work by Jerry Andriessen of Utrecht University. First, some theoretical considerations. This is already old stuff, so I hope you remember that we discussed the work by Johnson & Johnson in the module on learning as a social process. Johnson & Johnson distinguished 5 characteristics of effective cooperative groups. I just bring them back in your memory and activate them in order that we can use them for the following discussions. First, there should be positive interdependence between the members of the group, which means that the activities of one member positively influence the activities of other members of the group. Then there is individual accountability, which has to say that individual members of the group do feel responsible for their own learning, but also for the group products, for what the group establishes. And then there is promotive interaction, which means that group members support each other, give feedback to each other's work, help each other, etc., etc. So all kinds of positive interactions between the members of the group. The group members also possess the necessary social skills in order to make the group function effectively. And finally, there is also a group awareness, a group identity. The group reflects on its functioning, on its, let's say, positive results, and also on its problems, which have to be overcome. And this group processing definitely contributes to the effective operation of cooperative groups. So keep this in mind when we discuss other work and other projects. The first project we would like to discuss is the knowledge building project by Scaramalia and Breiter. Scaramalia and Breiter are researchers working at the Ontario Institute for the Study of Education in Toronto. They have been working for a long period of time on this and other issues. I remember that we organized the National Educational Research Conference, the Onderwijsdagen, at de Vrije Universiteit in, I think it was 2006, and I happened to be the chair of the conference, and so I could invite the most important keynote speaker, and I decided to invite Karl Breiter, who much to my happiness actually did agree to come. So he came with his wife Marleen Scaramalia, and when I met them for the first time, I suddenly realized that Karl Breiter was already over 70 years of age. So that was 10 years ago at least, so he must be over 80 now, but still very, very productive together with his wife, now in this area of knowledge building. First, the definition. Knowledge building is defined by Scaramalia and Breiter as the production and continual improvement of ideas of value to a community. What the community accomplishes will be greater than the sum of individual contributions and part of broader cultural efforts. So interesting to see here that knowledge building is definitely something which relates to what Bereiter and Scaramalia call the design mode of knowledge. So the design mode of thinking about knowledge is that knowledge is constantly being created, being improved, being enriched and adapted, etc. So this is a very dynamic view on knowledge construction, whereas the belief mode is the view that knowledge is something out there on the table which has to be verified, which can be true or false, and the falsehood or the truth value of knowledge should constantly be argued about and debated and tested, etc. So the belief mode is a more static idea about knowledge. It's just there, and you have to more or less get acquainted with it. You have to master it, and you have to make a fair distinction between false and true knowledge. Whereas in the design mode, this issue of falsehood and truth of knowledge is not so important. Important is that knowledge is never finished and that it should always be improved and made a better representation of the real world, so to speak. So these different modes are important, and what Scaramalia and Bereiter emphasize is that children already in primary education should learn to work not only in the belief mode, which is the default mode in our Western society, but also learn to work in the design mode of creating knowledge. And that experience will help them, when they have been grown up and adults and start a professional life. That's one thing, and the other thing is that learning and knowledge building are not the same. So the process of knowledge building creates a joint product in the group, and it is not necessarily also a contribution to the individual student's knowledge. So a teacher should be aware of that fact and should in fact help students to master their understanding and also test their understanding in order to be able to give feedback to the students, etc. So you should distinguish these two cognitive activities and not consider knowledge building per se as also contributing to the individual students' learning processes. Okay, that's let's say a bit as far as theory is concerned. What I forgot to say is we see now the overview. We should have seen that before, but that there is a danger of shallow constructivism, as Scaramalia and Bereiter call it. They mean that often students are engaged in projects and do all kinds of creative work in the classroom without understanding the meaning of that activity and without understanding the relationship between that activity and the big ideas in the curriculum they're working on. And as long as they do not grasp this relationship and this connectedness, their work is perhaps constructive, but it is of a shallow constructivism because it is not in depth related to a body of knowledge which is being built and which is being improved, etc. And that's a danger, of course, because in that case, students do not really understand what they are doing, and they may be less motivated to continue to work in these kinds of projects. Okay, so that danger is overcome by creating such a design mode of thinking about knowledge and this knowledge building, let's say, opportunities in the classroom. And how do you go along with that? Well, you transform classrooms in knowledge building communities by, in fact, creating communities of learners. That's the good news, because we have already been discussing these communities of learners at length in two previous modules. And in these communities, students are taken seriously as partners in knowledge development. There is the inquiry mode of learning, which is the basic pedagogical strategy. There is the relationship with the big ideas. There are the development of skills for communication, for research, for collaboration. There is reflection as a very important mode of bringing individual experiences and outcomes of experience together and unite them at a higher level, at a higher level of abstraction. And there are the tools, of course, available for everybody. Now, these 6 characteristics, you already know them by heart. They are relevant here in this knowledge forum, knowledge building community context. But there is also, of course, the technological innovation, and there the knowledge forum comes into play. The website or the web-based tool which helps students to organize their knowledge, their newly created knowledge, the concepts they bring together, and it helps them to relay these concepts. Let's have a look at it. You can see here knowledge forum. I've copied a picture which is perhaps not that much clear from one of the papers of Skademalia and Bereiter. I'll try to enlarge it a little bit. So you have various panels here, like we saw in the web, the inquiry-based learning projects. Various panels where you can do work, where you can actually make notes, connections between nodes, where you can organize your knowledge in concepts, and where you also can further elaborate on various concepts, and where you can, in fact, create other, as well as other graphical representations of the world, which is around, or which is the context of the specific topic you're studying. So these are all panels which help groups of students to build knowledge. Let's see what is included in these panels. First of all, you have the multimedia notes, the graphical views, where notes can be linked, commented on, and subsumed in higher level synthesis. This is interesting because we were talking about, reflection, which helps students to bring their experiences, or also their findings at a higher level of abstraction. Here you have a tool which creates higher level concepts which subsume already existing concepts, and in this way synthesize the knowledge which is being created. Now, these tools are available to organize knowledge, but there is also the possibility to structure the information in each of the concepts being developed by using scaffolds, by indicating what kind of information is in the concept. For instance, this is my theory, or this is new information, or this theory explains these and this phenomena, or this theory cannot explain these phenomena, so we need another theory. So these scaffolds help you to organize your representation of concepts, and helps you to clarify what you mean when you add a particular concept to a network of concepts. Okay, so this is basically just a view, just a small idea of what Knowledge Forum is about. You should read the papers by Skademalia and Bereiter. There are various papers available to give you a better idea and a more in-depth look into their project. Okay, that's what Knowledge Forum is about. And now I would like to say a few words in the context of computer-supported collaborative learning about collaborative writing. I used a paper written by De Smet and Hilde van Keer. Hilde is also a very active member of ECO, by the way. A research synthesis on effective writing instruction in primary education. So this is about primary education. I will also say a few words about collaborative writing in the university context. First, a definition. Let's see. Well, it's quite straightforward. An iterative and social process that involves a team on a common objective that negotiates, coordinates, and communicates during the creation of a common product, common text. Of course, we know the original Flower and Haze model, which we discussed back in one of the modules on I think it was memory and cognition, where we learned that planning and organizing ideas and revising are different and important steps in the process of creating a text. And these processes are also embedded, in group work, as you see that the group negotiates and coordinates and then communicates to the creation of common products. Groups have characteristics, as we saw when we referred to Johnson & Johnson. So it is important that group members are engaged with each other, so there is promotive collaboration within the group, that they are engaged with the topic and the writing process. These are all important preconditions in order to make a group successful in a joint writing project. There has to be a certain level of cognitive conflict, so the members need to reach a consensus. So there has to be a problem. Like we discussed, in the context of inquiry-based learning, there has to be a problem, a conflict, something which does not, in which expectations and reality do not meet and do not match, and which has to be solved. The group members, of course, have to trust each other, which is very important in a group activity, and the group has to be structured. For instance, by using different roles, adopting different roles like writer, consultant, editor, reviewer, team leader, facilitator. These roles are very helpful to make the group effective, and it's also a good experience for students to practice with each of these roles in different configurations, because then students learn to collaborate and learn these cooperation skills, which are so important also for their professional life. Okay. What kind of collaboration practices and strategies do we observe in primary education? And I also added some of the experiences in university education. Well, in primary education, you see that paired writing is often done, so couples, groups of 2 students, across age, peer tutoring, in which older students help younger kids in their activities, peer feedback, and also, of course, group discussions, which lead to a joint product. There is a parallel with university education. I based this sequence of 5 activities or practices and strategies on a paper by Anrubia and Engel in Computers in Education, Strategies for Collaborative Writing and Phases of Knowledge Construction in CSCL Environments. What you see here is there is an increasing amount of integration in these activities. The first and the simplest form of collaboration perhaps is the situation in which students actually contribute by handing in parts of the final text. So each and every student writes a part of the final text, and these parts are just glued together by cut and paste in order to create a joint text, which is in fact not more than the sum of the constituent parts. It is also possible that all students write several parts of the text, so that there is overlap between the individual contributions of the students, and then we are at the second level, and then there has to be some negotiation in order to arrive at a joint product. That's perhaps already a better situation. You can also imagine that students take responsibility for the organization of the text as a whole, and that so some of the students do create the backbone of the text, and other students provide parts of the text, and then there has to be also a sort of summative construction process in order to get one text. And you can also imagine that there are parts of the text which are written by 2 students. There are 2 texts delivered, which both relate to the same part of the text, the same paragraph, and then there has to be some sort of negotiation in order to arrive at a joint end product. And of course, you can imagine that discussion and writing and discussion and writing are interchangeably connected in order to arrive at a really jointly constructed text. And then we are at level 5 of integrated text construction. So this is a sort of scale with more and more integration and joint activities as far as the group is concerned. Okay. Yes, technology can support, of course, all these processes at various levels. You can imagine that technology provides provides support at the very technical level of writing itself by using word processors and exchanging texts which have been prepared in a word processor. That's very straightforward, and you can nowadays, it's difficult to imagine that you do not use a word processor. Although I must say that I think when I was still at Leiden University, so 15 years ago, there were a lot of colleagues who did not accept texts through email, but only were, let's say, willing to consider texts which were handed in on paper through the surface mail. And so that you see a lot has changed in between the last 15 years, let's say. You can also think of technology-enabled writing. So here you provide more tools to share and edit texts, new sources as well, internet, you can imagine. And you can imagine that you have negotiation tools in order to arrive at joint conclusions. Not simple the word processor, but also more advanced tools in which you can, like we saw in Knowledge Forum, arrange ideas and create in that way sort of a joint representation of the text. And finally, at the most complex level, the most advanced level, you can use instruments to write hypertexts, so text with words referring to other words in the text, or referring to other paragraphs in the text, or referring to sources outside the text. These so-called hyperlinks are embedded in hypermedia, and when you are writing, let's say, on a wiki, for instance, there are many tools available nowadays to create wikis, joint wikis. Then you are at the most advanced level of multimedia writing of technology support in the collaborative writing process. Okay, back to the work by De Smet and Van Keer. They observed practices which they considered as potentially helpful in primary education. And their most important advice is to combine strategy, instruction, so structure, with collaborative writing, with creative opportunities to write. So practice is important. Practice is important, as we saw earlier. But you can structure practice by providing appropriate strategy instruction. Both are necessary. That's the advice by De Smet and Van Keer. They will both, so the combination will enhance knowledge transmission as well as knowledge construction. Here we return to the idea of Scaramalia and Bereiter that it's not self-evident, or not always the case, that knowledge construction is accompanied by learning, so by knowledge transmission, in the words of Van Keer and De Smet. But you can also expect an increase of the quality of students' writing, as well as an increase in the motivation of students to write, if you combine appropriate strategy instruction with collaborative writing practices. And of course, you should integrate ICT tools with these instructional approaches, which does make sense in the context of this unit on computer-supported collaborative learning. Okay, the last topic to address is the topic of confronting cognitions in dialogues or argumentative interactions. I do like to refer to the work of Jerry Andriessen who used to be working at Utrecht University Department of Education. He has done very important work on collaborative learning, particularly on dialogues in which students exchange ideas, in which they argue, and in which they want to arrive at joint conclusions by arguments, by argumentative interactions or dialogues. He has written a lot, and I have just entered one reference, but there are many other references you could make use of to learn more about this important work by Jerry Andriessen and his colleagues at Utrecht University. Okay, first a few words about dialogues, then a few words about learning and arguing, then about CSCL tools, of course, in the context of this unit, and then a few words about the educational context in which these dialogues might flourish. First of all, a few more conceptual issues. What does Jerry Andriessen mean by argumentative interactions? Well, it's a matter of producing arguments and comparing arguments using a variety of types of reasoning. And of course, you can imagine that in his papers, he is elaborating on all these types of reasoning by of course, using the argument theory, theoretical approaches from philosophy. Well, of course, there is something which you are arguing about as one of the characteristics of an argumentative interaction. There's, of course, the media. There are the media of expression. So whether it's on paper and pencil, whether you talk, whether you use computers or other tools to do the dialogue. And there's the wider situation in which the dialogue takes place. So the context. And of course, there are local goals of argumentation, arriving at a consensus or solving a problem or sorting out, various points of view. And there can be many goals to which argumentative interactions work. So these are some characteristics of dialogues of argumentative interactions. Well, the question is whether students learn from arguing. It's a bit related to the question whether students learn from knowledge construction or whether students learn from writing. And the interesting thing is here that Jerry does provide some mechanisms which may help students to actually arrive at learning outcomes. How do students learn from arguing? Well, they do learn when there is a reflection. We have seen that time and again that reflection is important also in the community of learners context, and when they do restructure their knowledge. So there has to be some sort of change in their view on what what they think about a particular subject. So there should be some things should change, and then you can say that the participants in an argument really learn, and when they do reflect on the value of their positions or the value of various positions taken in an argumentative interaction. It is also, so now we talk about sort of cognitive effects, so learning at a cognitive level, but it is also true that arguments often modify underlying attitudes and in this way lead to reconsidering beliefs, perhaps losing rigid positions, and then it's completely clear that something has been learned. So when the underlying attitudes are addressed as well in an argumentative interaction, then there is an even more important result of the argumentation. And of course, new knowledge and understanding can be co-constructed in an argumentation. So that is the same what happens as we discussed in knowledge forums, so in knowledge building communities. And then, so this is, when this is the case, that's okay, that's important, that's fine, but still we need, of course, some extra mechanisms in order to enable students, individual students, to learn from this co-construction. It's not a self-evident, so that would be a comment, I think, but that Karl Bareiter would make, Bareiter and Scardamalia would make on this particular mechanism. It's not really a mechanism, it's just a reference to something which has to happen on top of this knowledge construction. Yes, but the reflection and the knowledge structuring is important, and addressing the underlying attitudes is also very important. What kind of CSCL tools can you actually use in these interactive, argumentative interactions in these dialogues? First of all, a sort of a relativistic remark, which I just noted down from one of the papers of Jerry Anderson. He really contends that non-verbal cues, like intonation and facial expressions and gesture, and of course the cost of utterance production, when you have to type your answers or your arguments with a keyboard, the loss of these cues and the cost of these utterance productions may make a dialogue more difficult. And that's the reason why I must admit I myself did not very much do with the work of the group in Utrecht, because I always had the feeling that they were creating very artificial situations with their computer programs in which students were arguing. But now that I more intensely read these papers, I must admit that I think that the work has been very important and influential. So I do agree with this caveat, but I also agree with the advantages of using CSCL tools for dialogues, which Jerry also mentions. First of all, you can structure the process. You can provide message categories or sentence openers like it was done in Knowledge Forum. We discussed that, and that helps to structure the process of thinking, the process of knowledge construction, the process of arguing, and that is of course a very positive contribution to the process of argumentative interactions or carrying out dialogues. You can also provide tools to represent the product of the argument, as we have seen again with in Knowledge Forum concept maps. They provide a language to represent ideas and a language to communicate about ideas, and these functions are very important in creating effective arguments. So the arguments may in fact be clarified by using these concept maps and other tools to represent the product of the argument. And then there can be, of course, an active guidance of the argument, for instance, by comparing student sentence openers, the use of student sentence openers, to an ideal model of interaction to generate a tutoring plan. So here we might have the idea, which is also laid down in intelligent tutoring systems, that there is something like an ideal model, so the expert model, and there is something like the way the student behaves, the student model, for instance, by using sentence openers or categories of messages, and you may compare what the student does with the ideal model, and then like in an ITS provide, a guidance, active guidance to structure and to structure the argumentation and to make it more beneficial. So these are in fact important CSCL tools which may encourage students to create sound and valid arguments, and may also foster the quality of the arguments. Okay. In what kind of educational context do you think that these dialogues can take place? Now, Jerry Anderson and Jacobijn Sandberg already made this list of 3 educational contexts in which you can envisage that dialogue is very helpful or not. I really rephrased a little bit the names of these contexts to make their point of view and their characteristics clearer in the context of this discussion of computer-supported collaborative learning. A transmission is the classical situation, individual learning, personal understanding, collaboration can be done to attain domain-specific knowledge, but it is a matter of, just following what has been explained or expressed by the teacher. So argumentative interactions cannot really change a thing here. So they are not very, I must say, very helpful. But when you focus on, and then we are at the second level, a more deep level, you might say, on the development of self-regulation and metacognitive skills, then of course collaborative learning is one of the skills to be mastered. So you have to comment as a teacher on the quality of collaboration and make it as a topic for discussion or a topic of learning itself. So discussing viewpoints and integrating personal beliefs and other people's ideas and information from different sources in the process of argumentative learning, that these are very important goals and objectives in an educational context in which self-regulation and the development of metacognitive skills is one of the objectives. So there you can benefit a lot from argumentative interactions, from dialogues. And then we arrive at the situation where we actually adopt the design mode of knowledge, where you are working on knowledge building, establishing learning groups, engage in knowledge building, and collective thinking, collaborative knowledge building, and communities of practice are irrelevant concepts, of course. And you can imagine that in such an educational context, dialogues are indeed very, very beneficial to the objectives of the learning of the curriculum, namely to create knowledge, to create new knowledge. And in that context, I think dialogues will flourish a lot and will really help to arrive at these new ideas and new knowledge. Okay, so that was to end this particular unit on computer-supported collaborative learning, a more in-depth discussion of important characteristics of the process of knowledge building, the process of arguing in order to create new knowledge, and the mechanisms which help to create new knowledge, which make people, students, learn, and the educational contexts in which these dialogues, these argumentative interactions may flourish. Well, that ends the discussion of this unit, and that also ends the discussion of this whole module. Let's go back to the objective of this module to see whether we actually accomplished what we planned to do. We have discussed and elaborated on the theoretical backgrounds of multimedia learning, technology-enhanced learning environments, learning analytics, and eventually the last unit on computer-supported collaborative learning. So we did address these theoretical backgrounds even more, I think, than perhaps in other modules, and that's the funny and the interesting thing about multimedia learning. As I said, these multimedia tools create new opportunities for learning and teaching, and they actually invite you to reconsider old concepts as far as learning and teaching is concerned, and reconsider their value and perhaps elaborate on their value. So they really stimulate thinking in the design mode about the processes of teaching and learning, which makes this module, I think, at the end of our journey to through the concepts underlying teaching and learning, an interesting last module. Okay, we talked about cognitive load, especially in the context of Meyer's multimedia learning theory, and we discussed the ways to combine images and text to reduce cognitive load. We discussed the distinctions between computer-assisted instruction and intelligent tutoring systems and explored the value of each of these approaches. We did discuss, the characteristics of adolescents who may start to become addictive gamers, perhaps. So the process of gaming and serious gaming was considered, and also the processes which make people so addicted to these games. We were discussing measures to decrease dropout rates, indeed, in the massive open online courses. These high dropout rates, as we discussed, retention rates of 10 to 30%. We did discuss learning analytics and also the SWOT analysis, and as I already announced, you will be asked to use this SWOT analysis when you complete the assignment for this module. And then we discussed the CSCL environments, various CSCL environments, the use of sentence openers, and the use of scaffolds in knowledge forum, and explain why these measures may contribute to cooperative learning and encourage students to embark on cooperative learning. So in this way, we actually finished the module on multimedia learning. I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this module as the last module in our program on teaching and learning. And I hope you also felt that the module was a good opportunity to connect concepts which had already been introduced in previous modules. Okay, thank you for your attention.